and he proceeded to sculpt a perfect bust of my mom. Like, looked identical. The teacher was astounded. And that started a lifelong passion for my father. He became a sculptor at late in life. He was immensely talented. And had he not walked into that class, he might have gone through his life and never discovered that. And so in the story of The Miserable Mrs. Madison, the tagline ends with, "It's never too late to find your marvelous."
Welcome to the Funny in Failure podcast, a podcast that celebrates failure and shines the light on the emotional side of comedy, with yours truly, Michael Kahan.
Today's guest is driven, funny, self-reflective, and wise. One way to describe Felicia that really rings true is resilience and brilliance. She highlights how age is not that important in the scheme of life, and one can achieve their dreams, desires, and passions regardless of the past. It was also really interesting to hear about the life of a mum who turned into a successful comedian. She also gives great insights into the world of comedy booking, laughter, and what actually makes a successful comedy club. So let's get into it and officially introduce today's guest. The self-proclaimed real-life marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Felicia Madison, has been bringing audiences to tears of laughter at some of New York City's most infamous clubs. The stay-at-home mother of three did not originally plan on a career in comedy. In fact, it wasn't until after having her children and recognizing her love for the craft that she left her life as an Upper East Side stay-at-home mum to join the ranks of all the comedians who came before her. Since starting her career, she has quickly become a prominent name in the New York City comedy scene, not only as a comic, but also as the director of new talent and talent booker at the West Side Comedy, where she curates and produces new talent shows. Through growing her platform, she aims to inspire others to achieve their dreams. So as you can imagine, we dive deep and we cover a lot, such as being the original marvelous Miss Maisel, her one-woman show, perfectionism, from mum to stand-up, being a comedy booker, age, and success. Before we get into this chat, in case you aren't aware, the videos are now available on YouTube under Michael Kahan. That's Kahan with a K, unless you're listening to it already. I find it adds a new element and dynamic to these chats. I'll still be posting snippets of these chats on Instagram under Funny and Failure, so check them out if you want to stay in the loop for upcoming episodes, or you want to ask a guest a question. I'd also love it if you would share the podcast or share your takeaways from the chat. It really motivates me, helps the podcast grow, and ensures I can lock in amazing guests like this one. And just as a final reminder, the podcast comes out every Monday at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, with the video to follow the following day. Anyway, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's epic episode.
Oh, this could be a good place to start. Can you tell me about that first moment when you saw the marvelous Miss Maisel trailer?
Oh my God, I will never forget that moment. I know exactly where I was, and I had been working on my pilot, which was about my life, Upper East Side Woman by Day, stand-up comic by night, and it was done, and I worked on it for a very long time, and I was super excited about it. And this is really embarrassing, but I was actually on vacation, and I was sitting on the toilet looking through my phone, and it popped up, and I just had this feeling of, you know, that feeling of your heart going into your stomach and like coming out of your mouth. And in my comedy, I joke, it was a good thing I was on the ground floor, because when I jumped out the window, I didn't die. It was just such a heartbreaking moment for me. And I was on the ground floor on vacation, and I never, ever, ever stay on ground floors on vacations, because I'm like a nervous Willy, and I'm always afraid someone's going to break in. But this place, and honestly, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to jump. And I'm like, okay, I'm on the ground floor. Nothing will happen.
Oh, That is crazy. The reason I was like speechless is because I've been writing screenplays for a long time. And the thought of putting in all of that work, and then it's not that you're not good enough. It's just that someone beat you to it. That would
Yeah.
crush me. How did you move forward? Like you could have just given up and done nothing. Please tell me your secrets.
Well, I was really upset about it. And actually, I watched an episode of it. And during the episode, I got physically ill.
Wow.
I actually thought I was going to throw up because it was so similar. It was almost as if you would think they copied my script and just updated it to make it, in the 50s or whenever it takes place.
Wow, that's crazy.
And there were so many similarities. It was frightening. It was upsetting. But then I spoke with someone about it and thought, like, can I still do it? Because it's very different, like that takes place in the 50s and I'm 50. She plays a Jewish mom. I am a Jewish mom. She lives on the west side, I live on the east side. And someone said no. They said it's not going to happen. And they told me that I should do a one-woman show and just get my name out there and my character, my persona out there. And then maybe if that's successful, someone would be interested in that. So I did do a one-woman show, and that kept me busy for a very long time, and it was very, very fulfilling. Didn't get me picked up by anyone, but I had a good time with it. And it was called The Miserable Mrs. Madison.
I heard about this, and it's so nice that despite getting that kind of no, that you actually turned it into something hugely positive, which has helped your career and helped you, and you talked about being fulfilled. But still, we'll get into that in a sec. I'm still not over this because screenwriting, you put your love, you put time, you put energy. I assume you hadn't done much screenwriting before, so you're learning, you're playing around. This is a new craft. You get that no. You could just give up, drink, do whatever it is, but you use that, let's say, negative experience into a huge positive. Why did you decide to do that?
Why did I decide to make a negative into a positive? Because that's my nature. I don't quit. I don't give up. I was raised that if someone says you can't do something, you say, show me. And I loved it. And actually, I am rewriting that script right now. Mrs. Maisel is coming to an end. This is her last season. I spoke with someone and I told them a little bit of a twist to the plot that he liked. And he said if I wrote it, he would read it.
Wow, that is awesome. We need to just get Marvelous Miss Maisel cancelled a little bit earlier so we can keep this going. That's very cool. And
do you know anyone that could do that for me?
Maybe. And in terms of that advice that you've received about not quitting, was that a family thing, a societal thing?
That was my father. My father would say, if someone said to him, that can't be done, he would say, watch me. And it's something that both, me and my brothers and I, we all have that same mentality. It also comes with a little bit of a bad twist. Like if you want something done right, you should do it yourself. That was another one of his sayings, which makes you someone that is like a control freak and wants to do everything.
Perfectionist.
I'm a perfectionist. And so that's the bad side of that phrase. But I walk around. My mantra is I can do this. If I hit a roadblock, I'm like, I can figure this out. I can get this done. And the alternative, you said, why did I turn it into positive? The alternative was like going under my covers and crying and never coming out. That wasn't a really good option. Although I thought about it. I thought about it for a while.
I really like that. And in terms of the perfectionist side, because that is, everyone's got a bit of that in them. It'd be very interesting to see how that works with stand-up. Because the stand-up, it's never always going to go quite to the plan.
It's never perfect. And it causes me to be very critical of my performances. And when I look at them, I look at, what went wrong, what doesn't look right, and I'm never completely satisfied, which keeps pushing you forward in your performance and your craft, because I keep wanting to get it better and better. But it's frustrating, it's tough striving for perfection.
But I've noticed, and I've noticed, like, just even in previous interviews that I've heard you in, it sounds like that it's become easier for you. That when you first started, you were hypercritical, and now it's become less hypercritical. And I know there's various different stages because when you hit certain levels, you want to achieve that success. I'm just wondering, has it become easier for you, harder? What's kind of been the relationship since you've been doing stand up?
You know, it's kind of what you said. Each time you hit a level, you get more and more critical. So to get it perfect, like when I first started, I just wanted to get on stage without sweating and shaking. That was that was my first obstacle. And when you first start, like, and it's like, I still find this when you do a joke for the first time on stage, it's always your best time doing it because it's so fresh and new.
Oh, nice.
So my first time doing stand-up, it was great. And then what happens is when you're doing it repetitively, sometimes you kind of lose the rhythm or lose the freshness. So it's actually acting. You have to remember that feeling you had when you first, and that emotion you had when you first told it, and keep that energy up and keep that tone up when you're saying it for the 100th time. And so as you get better, you get more and more critical. And more fine tuning things that you wouldn't have thought about in the beginning because you had so many other things to work on.
Yeah.
Like pacing back and forth on the stage. So you stop pacing and then you stand there and then I'm rocking. So now I'm working on rocking. And you keep fine tuning everything until you get it to a point where you're completely unhappy and want to start all over.
It's a very interesting take because the Australians and the Americans are a little bit different, and I'll get onto that in a sec. But I like that you talk about the first time that you're delivering a joke being like fresh and exciting, because for a lot of comedians I've spoken to, although that might be the case, it is still terrifying because you don't know if you're going to get that laugh. You don't know how it's going to work. You're sharing it for the first time. It's super vulnerable, but it just sounds like you just get up there and you're like, let's just see how this is going to go. Am I hearing that right?
Oh, it's because I'm brilliant and all my jokes are funny. I don't know who these other comics are, but they should choose another career. No, no, listen, I don't have that fear when I tell my first joke.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's funny. I started with another comedian friend, a new joke night at our comedy club, and we all get up there and tell new jokes for the first time, and it's so fun because everyone knows in the audience is there. They know we're all working on new jokes, so it's you just tell the joke and no one laughs, and you're like, ooh, okay, that sounded better in my shower. Well, ixnay that joke and start all over. But yeah, it's hard. Sometimes when I'm never afraid to tell the joke, but it is disappointing when you do tell some jokes and you get a bad reaction. That's a bummer. But it's not throw out the joke. It's like, okay, let's go back to the drawing board and see what I did wrong. And what's interesting also is when you go back and look at your, thinking about fine tuning and not liking jokes. Like once I told a joke and it totally bombed and it was like one of my really good jokes, and when I went back and played the video to see what went wrong, I actually forgot to say a really important word that totally changed the joke and made it not make sense. So you just never know. The point is you never know when you tell a joke if it's going to work or not work, and what you say and don't say, and you just have to go with it. You have to just have confidence that it's going to work, and when it doesn't, that's when you're like, someone said to me very early on that you learn nothing from succeeding. You learn a lot from bombing.
Please expand on that, because we have a lot of non-stand-ups here, and the thought whenever I talk to someone about the podcast or stand-ups, they're terrified that if they went up on stage and they didn't get the laugh, and that can scare people, but not with you. So
it's interesting. So I deal with a lot of new talent and new comedians, and we do shows for them, and we offer them the opportunity to get a tape. In the beginning they had to pay for the tape, and sometimes the comedian would go up and be like, oh my god, that was so bad, I don't want the tape, it's fine. And I said, no, this is when you should get the tape so you can look at it and see what you did wrong, for example, what I just told you, like forgetting a word, or maybe turning so people didn't see you, and you learn from it, and you look at that joke and you say, okay, that didn't work. Why didn't it work? How can I play with it? If you get up on stage and you kill, it's like, great, you got a great set. What did you learn from it? You learned you have a great set. You didn't learn anything to improve it, or any examination of it. It's the failing when you see something that doesn't work. It's what you learn from to learn the next time not to do the same thing.
This is why I love stand-up comedians, because it's literally like live or die. And it happens right then. It's instantaneous. Like previously I was an accountant, so if I made a mistake, that could take months before anyone finds out. And hopefully, someone else's signatures on it. No, but
sounds like my accounting.
And I think that's a really nice mindset. You talked about like a growth mindset, how you just want to keep on getting better, and that's what pushes you to strive. But even just small things like the tape, it's the little things that can do to help someone improve. And I think it's a really good idea that you encourage people to tape themselves, because you can also see it from an outside perspective and maybe less critical. And I know that also, I'm just throwing a lot at you, but I know that when you first started comedy, I think you were also taped, and it took you about 2 weeks before you looked at your tape, and maybe that's why you carried it on forward in your comedy clubs.
I was petrified to look at my tape, and I'm hyper critical of myself. I never think it goes with the perfectionism. I never think anything is good. And I remember it kind of like going in my room, closing the doors, turning it on, and like, and I was pleasantly surprised, which nice. for me is like winning an Academy Award. Yeah, so I was like, wow, maybe I got something here, and I was hooked. I was hooked from day one. I never stopped from that first time.
Let's build up to this, because I think you've got an amazing story. What got you to this point? I believe that you got into, was it pre-med? You're doing things in between. You were a mom, and then to make that transition into the big bad world of comedy, can be pretty scary. I'm very interested, or I'd like everyone to know how you made that jump.
Well, it's an interesting story in general. How I never really found my passion in life, and I ended up getting married and having kids before finding a career or anything that I really enjoyed doing. I kind of blame it on my parents. They raised the three of the children to do whatever it was they wanted to do, as long as they were doctors and lawyers.
I know the feeling.
So we had a choice of any kind of doctor and any kind of lawyer, and none of us became doctors and none of us became lawyers, and we're all super creative.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and so I had kids. I had 3. If you listen to my comedy, you would think I was a miserable mom, and I was. No. Of course, you exaggerate everything, but there's no perfect answer to, being a stay-at-home mom or a working mom. This whole concept of having it all is like BS. You can't have it all. And I was always searching for something, and I always had like, and I said if I had $1 for every idea I had, I'd be a millionaire. And I looked and I tried and I, took classes and just never really found anything. And I have a friend of mine who does stand up, very similar background, and he does it on the side. And I always said to him, I want to try this one day. One day I want to try this. And I said that because in life, whenever I was in a social situation that I felt uncomfortable, and I'm not really good at small talk, which I find a lot of stand-up comedians are not good at small talk.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I would listen, and then I would always tell a joke, and people would laugh. And my first 5 minutes, my first 5 minutes I did for the first time ever was like a compilation of 50 years of my life. So it was easy to come up with 5 minutes of comedy. It was basically just all the jokes I've told over the years. Coming up with the next, 45, that was difficult. So I just kind of kept searching, and it's the advice that I give to my kids, and it relates to my one woman show, which I could explain to you if you want.
Yes, please.
But it's just trying things. Like if I didn't try it, I would have never found it. And so my father, and the story that I tell in the one woman show, was uneducated, had dyslexia, before they knew that with ADHD and extra time you could go to Harvard. He didn't know. They thought he was dumb. He went in the Navy. He became a mechanic. And one day when my mom was 40-ish, she kind of went through the same thing I was going through, and she signed up for an art class and dragged my dad with her because she was afraid to go alone.
So
and
cute.
the teacher, you know, seeing my dad sitting there bored, gave him a piece of clay, and he proceeded to sculpt a perfect bust of my mom, like looked identical. The teacher was astounded. And that started a lifelong passion for my father. He became a sculptor at late in life. He was immensely talented. And had he not walked into that class, he might have gone through his life and never discovered that. And so in the story of The Miserable Mrs. Madison, the tagline ends with, "It's never too late to find your marvelous."
Beautiful.
That's what that's the message I try to give to people and my kids is, you got to try. You just never know what's out there if you don't try it.
Agreed. And I think it's the most important lesson. And especially like, I hate all of this like Hollywood BS around like age, or once you hit a certain age, you can't do anything. And you're an inspiration in that regard. And we've had so many people much older than you that have actually, a great example is we had this guy lived, an Indian guy who was a CEO of a tech firm and is doing really well. And then in his, maybe it was his late 50s, I don't know, it doesn't really matter. He really wanted to try stand-up. So in between, he was actually flying to different places in India so he could just get stage time and flying back to continue his life as a CEO. And obviously that's very demanding. And he eventually gave it up, and now he's got like a Netflix special, and it's just stories like this. Yeah, or he's, you know, like there's quite a few comedians on it. It's like the comedian of India, a comedian of Australia, a comedian of, anyway, the point is you don't need to become and get your own Netflix special. It's just that he had a passion for something and he decided to do something about it. And, you know, sometimes we hear like in the acting space, you have to be 18 when you become an actor. And once you get into your 30s, you can't do it. And hearing a story like yours, when you started inverted commas later in life, whatever that means, and to do it, and you've been doing so well, it's just truly an inspiration. And I like that you bring that back into your show.
Yeah, I mean, there are challenges of being older, but I also do find that, you know, the skills that we learned and over the years makes us so much more qualified than the younger people.
It's because you know who you are?
Definitely. You know, it's funny, like the younger kids, and I was like that when I was younger, and my kids are like that. They're like afraid, a lot of them are afraid of their shadow. They're just not confident. And I always say, you know, to my kids, don't wait till you're my age to feel good about yourself and feel that comfortable, you know, confidence that it's taken me so long to get. And I wonder if you just really need to go through the process to get it. If there's a shortcut, I'd like to know, because I'd like to, you know, bottle up and sell it. Then maybe I'd be super successful.
It's very interesting, the confidence aspect. When did you start feeling like you're confident that you could do this? Was this before stand-up, or did stand-up unleash this new confidence in you?
Stand-up definitely unleashed this new confidence in myself. I was the type of kid in class that could be completely confused and have no idea what was going on and would never raise my hand and ask a question.
Interesting. Pre-med, I would have thought you were extremely academic.
Yeah, I was very smart, and I figured out a way to get it done without raising my hand and asking a question in front of other people.
Yeah.
But I And even as an adult, when I was in lectures or whatever, and people wanted to ask a question, I would think about it in my head and try to think how I want to say it, and I would start sweating, and I would never ask the question. And now I won't shut up.
I know you probably get asked this 1,000 times, but the transition from you becoming a stand-up, did that present challenge? You navigate this how you want. I don't want a gossip session. Did that present challenges with family and like even your kids?
My kids, I have 3, as I said. My 2 older ones are fine with it. My little one was a teenager when I started, so I was a complete embarrassment already to her. So
Naturally.
so stand-up was just one extra thing to add on to the list of many.
Yeah.
And she, as a result, gave me a lot of stand-up comedy to work with.
Oh, that's the
she was my muse. She gets the brunt of my comedy, and now she's in her 20s, and we're starting to really bond and get along, which is great for our relationship, but horrible for my comedy.
Oh, that's amazing.
I need to find a new muse.
Maybe, I don't know. What about your parents? Because it sounds like hearing your story as well, like, for example, your dad finding his love later in life, which is also an inspiration. And I know that he's passed away. Were you doing stand-up when he was around?
He never got to see me do stand-up, which is sad. I think if he were here, he would look at me and be like, "You're doing what?" I don't think he would have approved. Yeah, I would maybe make fun of I make fun of my mom a lot. I made fun of her in my one-woman show a lot. I don't really make fun of my dad that much, but I think I just found my new muse. Thank you.
Well, your mom.
About my dad.
Oh, mom's always.
I also,
yeah.
The one thing I haven't really made fun of a lot is, and people always ask me this question, is my neighborhood and my upbringing and my friends and the whole environment that I live in, because it's very, very easy to make fun of. And I just always had, it's like, it's the Upper East Side, the ladies at lunch, and I just never really wanted to go there because, you don't want to shit where you eat kind of thing. I also think it might be the one thing that's holding me back a little bit. Like, I need the people that I know that are super successful, just, they don't care. And I still care a little bit. I still care a little bit what people think about me.
So if they don't care, then can't you use them as content? Because they won't care.
Well, no, I'm saying other comedians don't care. Like other comedians, the successful comedians I know, like dig into like their background and their upbringing, and they make fun of who they are, and I'm starting to
That's
make
great.
jokes playfully about it. So, but it's also somewhat, one of the biggest challenges I had when I started doing stand-up and working on the clubs is, most of the audience were, young couples or young guys. And every once in a while, I start doing my mom material. I call it mom com, and you just hear like silence. It's
Really?
like the laughter just starts to die a little bit. It's like, okay, you guys don't want to hear about my mom issues. And so that was the biggest challenge. So I did have to come up with a whole routine that was not about parenting or my lifestyle. But when I'm within my lifestyle and I'm performing to people that know me and who I am, I can make jokes about that. Like, for instance, I make jokes about my weight. And if I do that like in front of a regular audience, they look at me like I have 8 heads, because I'm by no stretch of the imagination heavy. But I joke with them and I say, well, where I'm from, I'm like obese. When you get to be larger than a size 2, you get replaced.
See, that's hilarious.
Yeah. So, I have to try to relate it. And those are some of the things that I do to sort of make it more relatable to people. But I would say the biggest challenge I've had is, coming up with content that is generically for a wide range of audiences funny.
That's what makes like you a master comedian. It's not like, obviously it's great to have our like crowds that we can, play to, but be able to play to a whole range. That's when you hit that elite status. But also in terms of like the lifestyle that you're talking about, people will love that. I know that if someone bags me, whether it's my belief system or me being Jewish or whatever it is, and if it's done well, you just want to be talked about. People are so narcissistic, like, yeah, you're talking about me. But I think that's really cool that it's kind of forced you to adapt and change, because you could play to a specific group and be very comfortable doing that. But, you talked about the growth mindset and how you want to be the best. And it's forced you to become this wide ranging, like universal comedian. And I think that's the goal. It's forced you to get out of your comfort zone, both you and the situations as well.
It's funny because it reminds me that one of the worst pieces of advice I ever got was from a teacher. Every comedian has someone that they go to that helps them work out their jokes or helps them come up with better ways to say things. And I went to this one guy who I didn't like, gave me no good advice, and this was the worst. He said, people just don't like affluent people, and they're not going to like you, and so you can't talk about that.
Wow.
And so that sort of was the reason, I think, why I stayed away from that for so long, and now maybe I need to go back and revisit that a little bit.
Well, you already have, but in terms of the bad advice, you receive a lot of the bad advice, especially, and feedback this is a topic I'm obsessed about. As a screenwriter, or in my very limited experience doing comedy, we kind of want feedback, especially at the start. But if we've got too many people giving us feedback, and sometimes we want to impress them for whatever reason, but most of the time it's shit or it's their own stuff, and it can be very hard to realize what is real, what is my bias, what is their bias. So have you become better? Well, it sounds like you're already thinking about it. Have you had an interesting relationship with the feedback aspect?
Well, it's funny. I do a feedback open mic where I work with young comedians and we give advice.
Comedy?
Yeah, it's how I started out in the whole management side of my career, which is running a club and booking a club. And I started doing these open mics and feedback, and I always start every single one of them, and I say a couple of things. First and foremost, just because I don't find it funny doesn't mean it's not a funny joke.
I like that.
It just means that I don't find it funny. And I am just one person in, the universe. And there are comedians that are super successful comedians. I mean, and I'm sure you would agree with this, that you just don't like, find funny. They're not your style. So that's first and foremost. And the second thing is, like I say, I don't know what I'm talking about, so you can take it or leave it. I'll offer you advice. If you like it, take it. If you don't, leave it. You have to be true to yourself and do what makes you feel good. I've in all the years I've been doing this, and one person who's a very successful comedian who's helped me a little bit said to me, you never take my advice, but I'll tell you, I'll tell you this one thing, because to me, if it doesn't feel right and it doesn't feel like my voice, I'm not going to do it. And it's very hard to find someone out there that has your same voice. Like I would go to these people and they'd be like, well, try this. And I'd be like, I don't think so. And, it just, and I guess maybe I'm kind of unique. So it's been very hard for me to find a mentor that can help me. So I've been pretty much doing it all on my own.
Well, that has a huge amount of pros as well, because it's forcing you to keep on working at your craft, and you are very unique, which is awesome. But also I really like how you kind of bring up the intuitive side, because it doesn't matter if you're a stand-up, it's important for everything. People give us feedback all the time. Sometimes it's right and our ego gets in the way, but more times than not, through my experience, people giving us feedback and it doesn't feel right. And I know that I've got people pleasing in me, so I might try and do that, but that doesn't help. And especially in your field, if you're going to not be intuitive and keep on doing what other people think, then one, you're not going to be successful, and who you're actually doing it for. So I think that's like such a key point.
Yeah. I mean, there are basics that are not opinion that you could give as feedback.
Yeah.
You know, like rocking or moving or using your hand movements too much, or saying ands, ums, and likes, or not looking up at the stage. There's more performance aspects, and also structure of a joke. Jokes do have certain structures. The one thing that all people that teach comedy have a problem with is telling a story that's funny is not a joke.
Interesting.
There's a difference.
Like the punchline and
Yes.
yep, the craft.
And the length of it, and there's a craft to the joke telling. So, and when you're a beginner, people say, oh, so-and-so gets on stage and tells stories. And I'm like, well, so-and-so's famous. He could be like, just sit there and people would watch.
You have to get there, yeah.
You have to get there before you could like tell a long story. Because if you're in a club and you're telling a long story and they have no idea who you are, they're going to start talking to their friends or concentrating on their food, or they're going to get bored. So you got to keep the pace, like quick, joke. In the beginning, at least.
I agree.
And also, everyone's working to their type 5, so you want to keep it tight.
True. And it's kind of like know the rules before you can break it. And even like screenwriting, you need to understand the rules, but then you can do whatever you want, because you need to understand the craft. I think that's very important. But also in terms of delivering feedback, as I'm doing improv, for example, and the place that I'm at, they deliver feedback spectacularly. And they've obviously probably learned how to do it. There's an art in it, because, and I know this is a passion of yours, and you like to kind of mentor people through the comedy stuff that you do, which we'll get into in a sec. And I think that's a great skill. Because of feedback that you've received previously, is that how you're able to deliver feedback through such a loving way? Because I'm adding layers to this. These people can be
well,
like impressionable.
You obviously don't know me that well. Because one of the other things I say when I start my comedy is I don't give positive feedback because I wasn't raised that way.
But you're delivering your feedback. You do, actually.
It's always pretty negative. Some people would say, like, okay, I love the way you did this. I love the way you do that. And this works really great. And I just find that in a way, they're supposed to translate that into, okay, this works, this other stuff doesn't. Which I think is just too much work. I'm just like, that does not work. Okay. I'll point out what doesn't work so you could take it out and concentrate on the rest. I'm very to the point, and I'm very much saying, like, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. I don't think this is. And again, I preface it all with saying this is my opinion, and it doesn't mean it's right, and it has to be right with you.
That's the aspect that I'm talking about. It's the delivering the feedback, because if you didn't say that at the start and you just got straight into the end bit, people would be triggered. They wouldn't be able to hear it. But that is a love and a kindness in your way. And I think that's really important, because it's true. You're not saying that your opinion is the only opinion, but you're still creating a space of love, which people need, especially at the start of stand-up. They're so impressionable. There's so much going on. And you talked about that one guy that gave you advice and how it can really like stick to you. So I think that is actually a really empowering way of giving feedback, especially just saying, this doesn't mean I'm right. This is, everything that you just said as well. So I wouldn't say it's a negative versus positive thing. You're creating the space.
It's very important and very interesting how contact with a particular person could shift your thinking so radically. I vividly remember being in middle school and a teacher telling me like I was bad at writing. And to this day, I think I'm a bad writer.
I know, it sticks.
Yeah, and so you have to be careful about who you keep as your look out for your mentors, and who your kids. You put them out in the world and they get these random teachers that influence them. So it's you have to be careful about who you let give you feedback and who you let into your life.
I think it's crucial. I used to speak about this a lot, like you kind of the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, or your environments, your friends. If they're constantly like feeding negativity, then you'll pick up on the negativity. Or There's the famous example that I butchered 200 times. I think Adam Sandler and who's the guy that produces every single like comedy in the Judd Apatow. I think maybe they live together. Someone will correct me. Anyway, the point is that they all kind of lived together and they grew up together because it seemed like they had the philosophy like your success is my success. So they built each other up and it was all there to help each other grow. But if you're in an environment where you don't quite have that like positive structure, you'll pick up on a lot of the negatives. So it is very crucial where we can to spend time with people that we resonate with and also challenge us and everything in between, if that makes sense.
So you mentioned Judd Apatow because I would love for him and Leslie Mann to play me and my husband in my pilot.
Oh, we're putting that out there because I've not reached out to him yet. He would, yeah.
They'd be perfect. They'd be perfect. Yeah, but there are very few people in this world that want to help lift people up. And I am one of them. I want to help comedians. I try my best to give them as much opportunity as possible. And it's hard because young comedians feel like sometimes clubs and managers and people are like taking advantage of them. And it's interesting, being a booker and running a club and also being a stand-up comic myself gives me a unique perspective because I can now see both sides of the story. I remember when I first started performing, it was at a particular club, and I would get up on stage and I'd make people laugh, and I'd get off stage and say to the booker, I'm a genius. Look, they all laughed. Why are you not booking me? Like, it's funny. And I have to tell all these newbies that, yeah, you know, if you're not making people laugh when you get on stage, you're in the wrong business.
Yeah.
And then what you notice, because I used to do new talent shows and I would intermix them with pros, and you would see it and you would hear it. You would see that when the professional got up there, the decibel of laughter was so much higher and the frequency of laughter was so much more frequent. And that's the difference between a beginner and a pro. I could get up on stage and get laughs for 5 minutes and they're like great laughs, but then you see, you know, Jim Gaffigan or, you know, they get up there and it's like booming off the walls and it's like every 5 minutes, you know, every 5 seconds, yeah, there's a joke. So that's the hard thing that you have to teach young comedians. When I think it's the hardest part of my job is like, the thing I like the least about it is like having to say no to people and try to figure out a nice way to, you know, constructively let them down.
It's interesting. I think you're the only talent booker that we've had on the podcast, and I think it's very interesting. You know, we hear examples of actors not getting roles for certain reasons. Then when you hear the casting side, it's a very different way of thinking, and we only really hear about the one way of thinking. And I think that's really unique. And also in terms of you actually wanting to help, you mentioned how in your environment you haven't seen too many people want to help, and it's very easy when you're in an environment like that to not want to help. But as I said, like people, I think I've heard you say that people call you like mum-ager or something like that because you actually want to help people. It could be easy not to. Why have you decided to actually want to do that? Because you could just focus on yourself and work on your craft, but you go up and beyond.
Yeah, it's good and bad because I feel like if I spent more time working on myself, I could have gotten further. But I guess it's my mom instinct in me that, you know, it just sort of happened. It's interesting. This is another thing I struggle with is in life when you have a passion and a talent, which for me is stand-up's my passion. I love it. I think anyone that does it though loves it. And then you find some part of it that I incorporated into my life as a necessity. So originally this was just a way for me to get stage time, to help to produce shows. And I ended up being more successful at that. And then you look at your life, and I'm like at a fork in the road, and one is a path that, like, for instance, I'd produce these amazing shows, and I'd perform on them, and I'd get off stage, and all the people there, if I knew them, but they would walk up to all the comedians, and they'd walk up to me and be like, "Oh my God, you put on such a good show." And I'm like, I just got off stage and nothing to say about my comedy.
Oh, that's great.
And so, like, what do you do? Would you go towards the passion that maybe is not as easy of a road for you, or a harder road, or do you go through this path that you find that opened up to you that you seem to be pretty good at? I believe that I have a very good eye when it comes to talent, and I think I have a good way of helping comedians.
Yeah.
And I put together good shows. I do. And so what do you do? Like, I'm constantly asking myself the question, do I give up the stand-up, or do I keep doing this? And, people said I couldn't do both. And I said, watch me.
There you go. That goes back to your quitting philosophy. But
Correct.
I would also imagine, and I know it's very challenging doing both, but they would feed each other, because you're constantly looking out from that producing side. What makes someone good? What makes the laugh? So you're actually analyzing it in a way that no one else is analyzing it. So I would think theoretically it would massively help your comedy. You might not be able to put in as many reps as you would like, but you're actually applying your mind in a completely different way, which could actually be quicker. I know, like, you need stage time and you're still getting it, but you're seeing it in such a unique way.
Yeah, and it's interesting, this whole concept of reps and stage time. I know a few comedians like myself who started later in life, and have figured out a way to do it differently.
Ooh.
We're not young, and we don't have and can't do like the 3 shows all over the place, 5-7 days a week. And so we do things differently. And we have more time than a lot of these younger comedians who have to work a day job and do the comedy at night. So we have to make our own roads and make our own opportunities and do it in a different way. So yeah, I do get a lot out of producing, and just watching a lot of comedy and just watching other comedians helps in and of itself.
You're probably going, I like that, I don't like that, that could have been better, I would have done this. And that's already, to me, that's just the best type of learning as well. I know you talked about reps, but another thing which I think is extremely inspiring is, as you said, you started in inverted commas later in life. And that can scare a lot of people, because like people say, like, when you're young, you make all the mistakes so that you become good later in life. And I don't know about that, but what you did was really interesting. You created your own environments to succeed. You talked about F Comedy Club. I think you had a mother's lunch club. You put yourself in the best position to succeed, and didn't just let like these other factors massively impact your career. You went out there and you created these pathways. So what were you thinking at the time when you were starting up?
I still think my age is an issue, and I always joke that people are looking for the next Amy Schumer. They're not looking for the next Amy Schumer's mother. And I don't blame them. If you're someone that wants to invest in someone and give them your time and energy and money, you want to make sure you're going to have a long trajectory and watch them grow for very many years. And I'm, don't necessarily fit into, you have all these 20-something comics, and then me, they weren't really, falling over to book me. Let's put it that way. So I had and in the beginning, I don't know if it's like that in Australia, but here in New York, we do bringer shows. Are you familiar with bringer shows? No. So it's a big controversy here in New York, because there are a lot of people that take advantage, and it was sort of the start of why I did F Comedy. So in the beginning, when you do stand-up to get stage time, basically a producer would say, okay, if you could bring 5 people, you could get 5 minutes.
Gotcha.
And there are a lot of producers out there that do that, and they just want to make money and take advantage of the comedians. And what happens usually is people do that in the beginning, and then they run out of friends.
That's right.
And then they figure out something. They either produce their own shows or do bar shows or whatever, until there's like a 6-year time frame until they get to the point where they get passed at a club or get discovered or whatever. So I wanted to I called that 6 years like the desert. And I wanted to provide water for the desert. So I wanted to put on a better bringer show, one that didn't take advantage of the comedians, one that had really good talent, that wasn't like 3 hours long, that was like torturing your friends. And so I didn't make as much money, but that wasn't my goal. My goal was to make a great program for comedians. So I didn't make a ton of money, but I provided a great opportunity for young comedians and a great show I had people leaving my show saying, oh my God, this was like the best comedy show I ever did. And the other thing I did is I wouldn't put just anyone up. Like I went up on a show once and there was like a woman playing a ukulele, and it was just like, so I was very critical of who I put up there. They had to be funny. They had to be really funny.
I like that. And I think it's also like it's very important, because you hear so many examples. Like a lot of my friends want to get into sports, but they're like, no, you haven't had the experience, or, you hear that all the time. You don't have the experience. But what I hear from you, and also even like hearing from your father, is that you don't give up, and you've created these pathways. And it's very easy to be disillusioned with society, for example. And I'm not blaming anyone. You say that the opportunities weren't presented, but you still went out and did something about it. And I think that's all you can do. And look, I'm not saying maybe you weren't annoyed or frustrated at times, because there are gatekeepers and all of that stuff, but it sounds like you did what you could to succeed. So you empowered yourself. That's all that we can do.
Yeah, and I really tried to help other people. And, one other piece of advice that someone gave me is, when you go into a club, you should be nice to every single person you come in contact with, because that person checking your coat, you don't check coats at clubs, but or taking your drink or running the new talent program could one day become the booker of the club. And so if I had people when I was starting out, they were like, I'm not doing a bringer, I'm above it. And then I had people that did it, that became a part of my core people, and now they're part of the club because they gave to my cause and my community and invested their time and energy, and I'm rewarding them for that.
I think that's an awesome life thing. Like, not that we need to necessarily do something because we think someone can positively help us, but it's just about being a good person. And by being a nice person or a good person, opportunities come. But if you're a dick to everyone, doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to experience the positive and the joy that the universe has to offer.
It's true. It's a good life lesson. And you'd be surprised how many people come in and they're like rude to the guy checking people in.
I really don't get that.
Yeah. And it's funny sometimes, like when I'm there, when I first started it, people didn't know who I was. It was interesting to see them talking to me and not knowing any idea that I was the booker of the club. And then when they found out how different they acted towards me.
Oh, interesting. I would also imagine from the booker, now you've got all the power in the world, and I know you have sounds like you've got a good relationship with ego. You could have all the power play in the world. You could have done all of the stuff that you've heard about not being provided with opportunities or just seeing what's happening in the industry. And you could be like, I'm not hiring you. I don't like your haircut. But you've gone, I know that you've helped different, like diverse comedians coming in as well. And we talked about the nurturing aspect, but you haven't applied that power trip. You're applying it through like your specific lens of love. And that's very interesting. Power can breed power.
But I've lost a lot of friends or comedy people because of my position.
Interesting.
Yeah, like some people that I didn't think we're ready, or for whatever reason, we had a difference of opinion, it has severed some relationships. And the other thing I say is sort of in the lines of being nice to everyone is, especially in New York, there's a lot of talent, a lot. Like, I book my shows and I can't even get through half of the list of people I want to book.
Wow.
And if you're difficult, or if you, not that I don't like your haircut, but if you are constantly doing something to make my life difficult, why should I book you? I want to make my life easy, and I could just as easily find someone else. And I've had to do that a couple of times, and I always give second chances, though.
I love that.
Because people make mistakes.
Right.
But yeah, it's hard. It's hard, people don't generally like hearing criticism or being turned down. So it's and especially, when they disagree with you. So it's a hard thing to do.
Well, you've talked about kind of like what you look for and how you look for, and I love the second chance bit, because you're right, everyone makes mistakes. And also at the same time, if you're going to be difficult and a jerk, like, what do they expect? And you're in a great position, but there are also hard elements, because as you said, you can only feel half that, not even half. And sometimes you just might get like a vibe, or intuitively you need to do this. You've also got tickets to sell. There's a combination of things that I'll never quite understand, because I'm not in that space. So actually, with the friend side, what is your kind of like take on it? Because you're not being malicious. You're doing it with what I assume for the highest good of the club. You're not doing it for your own ego trip. Do you just say, like, those friends weren't to me? I'm sure it stings, but how do you kind of like put that into perspective?
You have to. I believe in being, true to yourself and true to what you believe. And if people don't like it, then those are people I shouldn't be around.
Perfect.
And I am honest to a fault. And I've learned a lot on how to deal with people. And I asked a lot of, like, how do you tell someone that's not ready that they're not ready? Or what do you say to them when they like email you 10 times, why are you not giving me spots? And someone said to me, why are you even bother returning their emails? And I'm like, because I'm nice. I feel bad. They send me an email. I want to give them, advice, or just like not, because it was so frustrating for me when you would send someone an email and get like nothing back.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah. But now that I'm starting to get tons of them, I'm like, whatever. Well, it's a little different, but yeah, I think you have to, like, one of the initiatives I did recently, which was a bit controversial, was when this whole Roe v. Wade was overturned, I was very upset about it, and I decided to make my open mics free, and people that came had to show proof of donation to a pro-choice charity, of their choice, and whatever they wanted. And someone on my Facebook post, when I posted it, was like, he had a negative comment, and I was like, well, then don't come to my club. I don't care. I don't want you. If you don't believe in what I believe in, like, who wants you? And someone said, like, well, what if someone, another club did like a, whatever, to insult you, what would you do? And I'm like, I wouldn't go to that club. It's like, they don't like it, too bad. That's, I feel strongly about it. And so gotta stick to your guns.
It's a very interesting concept, because it also comes with, not everyone's going to like your stand-up. And if you don't like the person performing stand-up, don't go and see them do stand-up. But I'm sure, and you've seen this a lot as well, like, people will let you know if they don't like your stand-up, or they don't like someone. It's like, you don't need to watch. You don't need to be a part of it. Do you have an interesting take on that? Because you would have probably seen the whole different space of the negative comments and people attacking for no reason, or they didn't like one thing that you said, or they're unhappy because you mentioned that you come from a certain environment. Does that impact you, or do you switch off from that?
It doesn't really impact me that much in my comedy, because I don't think my comedy is, well, it's sometimes I do things that people don't like. I have a couple of jokes about like learning disorders or weight, and you kind of just have to, like, when that happens, when you get that ooh, you kind of just like, you have to be confident and you have to dig in and own it. I think comedians that flail are the ones that make these comments that are controversial and then are like, oh, sorry, you know, like, ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta, if you're gonna do it, you gotta be strong and you gotta dig deeper and make even more of a point. And it's this whole cancel culture. It gets to the whole cancel culture thing of like what you can say and what you can't say. And I struggle with it a little bit. I do struggle with the concept of, you know, we're comedians, we can say what we want. And I'm like, really? We can say whatever we want, even if it's like really hurtful to someone or could be violently damaging to a group of people. Just because we're comedians, I have a problem with that. And then I was talking to someone about it when this whole, you know, I can't remember who it was. It wasn't the Will Smith thing. It was something else. And he said, you know, you can't just get up there and say, kill the Jews. You know, I'm Jewish, so I could say that. That some people might laugh, right? Is that a funny? Yeah, like, because it was so outrageous. So like, is that a funny joke? Is that okay? Can I just get up on stage and say that? It's not a structured joke.
Yeah.
You know, it's not. There is an art and a science form, not a science, but there's an art to comedy and there's a form to it, and you have to adhere to it. First of all, you can't just get up there and, you know, unless you're famous, and then people listen to you and it doesn't matter. And I do think there are some boundaries. I think there are some things that, you know, they always talk about crossing the line in stand-up, and I was always curious about that. And someone said to me, oh, you'll know when you cross the line.
The audience will let you know. It also comes into like intention as well. Like, for example, someone like you, we know that, how do I phrase this? You're not going to get up there and like preach hate and genuinely like want to like kill someone. And so intention's also very important. Whereas if there's someone up on stage like, holy shit, I think this person's not doing stand-up, they're actually meaning what they say. Like, a lot of comedians get up there and they make a joke for joke's point of view, but they're not actually being serious. And there's also the art of that,
right.
And intention comes into play.
Well, that happens a lot, and that's a lot of criticisms I give to stand-up comedians. And when they get up there and they start with an offensive joke or a really racy joke, and I'm like, okay, these people don't know you. And the first thing you're doing is like making them very uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's very important.
Get them to like you a little bit, get them to know you a little bit, and then you could get a little bit more like, you know, racy, and then dig into it. And that's sort of what you're saying. You have to get people to like you and know you, and then.
Yeah. Can you imagine again, like, I hate Jews? Anyway, thanks. That's one thing I wanted to just quickly talk about again before we do a rapid fire segment to wrap up the podcast is fear. So we've talked about all of the things that we've talked about today, and, you know, hearing what other people have said. I want to know what's kind of been the relationship with fear now, because, you know, you've talked about how you previously shied around like certain topics, but now that you're talking about it more, is fear something that's constantly on your mind? Do you have a good relationship with it? Is this something that you think about? Tell me your secrets.
I don't really fear. I fear not having anything to do. That's my fear. So I keep myself very busy. And that's driven me to success in a lot of ways, and it's also driven me to failure in a lot of ways.
Expand, please.
You know, like, it's kept me sometimes from, you know, sort of like sitting back and smelling the roses sort of thing. because I don't like to sit down. I don't like to not be busy. I don't like not having a project. And I find myself, I think I'm an undiagnosed ADHD person because I can't shut my brain down and I can't stop moving. And, there's a lot to be gained by taking a step back and sitting and relaxing and observing and, taking the time to smell the roses. So that's the drawback. And the positive is it keeps me productive and moving forward.
It's very interesting. I know that you talk about mental health a lot, which I think is really important. And, you've talked about being hypercritical and, being self-critical, but it does sound like, yeah, there might still be elements of that, but it does seem like you found kind of a passion and it has helped with that. And I'm not saying it's the cure, but I have noticed with so many people that a lot of these negative self-talk or whatever we want to call it does dissipate either fully or to stronger degrees when we find something that we actually love, because it gives us like purpose and passion.
Yeah, one of the things that I've struggled with in addition to, depression is, my body dysmorphia. I'm being very upset with the way I look. And I say to people, two very interesting things happen. I say to people, I've never been like more out of shape and overweight, and I've never been happier in my life. So it doesn't matter. And someone said something to me on one of my podcasts when she heard me make a joke about my weight. She said, let's go back to that. She said, it's a trap and a lie for women, and it keeps us from concentrating and thinking about what is really important in life. And that really helped me also to let go of that perfectionism and caring about it. And it's true, like when you have something that you love and it gives you a sense of purpose and you just can't wait to do it. I mean, it makes you happy. I mean, it was interesting because one week I wasn't on stage for a week, and I was really depressed and I couldn't figure it out. Like just like crying for like no reason, which happens every once in a while. And then I got back on stage and I was like that. I was a happy person, which is like good and bad because like, it's like a drug, Yeah. So it just like made me feel good about myself. But also, everything that I'm doing right now, it makes me feel better about myself.
Ooh, do you want to expand on that? Because I know like you've spoken about meditation and working out and things like that. And, there's so many different things that people can do. Passion purpose is a thing that I'm very pro. Are there any other things that you do or any other advice that you might want to share?
Well, you touched on it. I started meditating, and let's see, 6 to 8 weeks later was the first time I ever went on stage.
Whoa. Good for you.
Coincidence, maybe, I don't know. And that's a little bit part of me also like taking time to not always be doing something, so it's hard for me. But yeah, I think whenever you find yourself at a point where action is better than inaction is what my husband would always say. You could sit and just wallow and be upset, or you can try until you figure it out.
That is beautiful. That is a great way to do a very quick rapid fire segment. I think you know how these things go. First thing that springs to mind, but you can Don't worry,
that's very dangerous with a comedian, by the way.
Like this. One we had previously. And
you're going to get me canceled.
That's the goal. What are you most proud of?
My children.
What are you most proud of in your career?
My one-woman show.
What brings the best creative content out of you?
My daughter.
And now maybe your dad. If you could gain any skill in the world, which one would it be?
Oh my God, any skill in the world. Oh my God, that's a tough one. Well, for me, which is silly, it's not really a skill, but one thing I would love to learn how to do is sleep.
That is a very good one.
I am a
Essential.
bit of an insomniac, so if I could figure out how to do that, I would be a much more productive, better person.
That's a great answer. What would you do if you knew you cannot fail?
Stand-up comedy.
You have to expand on that. We're going to leave it out, or you want to expand?
What would I do? You know, one thing that I've always thought of doing is going into politics.
Interesting.
Yeah, so if I knew I could win an election, I would do it.
Is it something that's on the radar, or
Possibly.
okay,
I've thought about it a lot. Because I'm passionate and I'm opinionated, and I fight and keep going until I get what I want. And I think I would be good at it.
and caring as well? We need that on all sides of politics.
The only problem is my past, so I'd probably never be elected.
I know you're making a joke, but there's no way that your past would even be like a percent of what some of the other people is you kind of said this, but we'll say any advice you want to give people who want to try something different or new, but perhaps a bit fearful of doing so?
Just do it. I mean, Nike was brilliant, just do it.
If you could go back into a time when you were first starting out, what advice would you give yourself and why?
I would tell myself to believe more in yourself and have more confidence in yourself, and you can do it.
What age would you be when this Felicia comes and sees that the
Right,
younger one?
the age I am right now. No. I mean, I think you can always say yourself, but I think in my 20s, when you're first starting out, it's such a hard time. I mean, someone once asked me if I had any advice for 20-somethings, and I said, well, I have 3 of them, so I have a lot of advice I could give. It's to believe in yourself. It's again, we just touched on it, but I think you partially have to go through life and experience and do things to help make yourself feel confident. Some people are born with it, maybe it's Maybelline, maybe she's born with it, I don't know.
Well, but hearing what you're saying, that you've developed the confidence through your craft and finding passion and purpose, so it's also a second point to that. This is my favorite question. Before I ask how people can follow you, keep up to date with you and all of that stuff, what is the one question I should have asked you?
How my upbringing as a young child molded me into the person I am today.
We could talk about that for 200 hours. Is there a
Is there a quick what's next on the horizon for me? I guess we discussed that a little bit. What my next chapter is going to be. I guess we touched on that a little bit with maybe.
Do you want to expand further on it? Besides being president,
or my dreams, like what my dreams are. I would love to, like, my goals for the year were to film my hour and get my pilot up and running, and then also maybe redo my one-woman show.
Very cool. And how are we tracking?
0 for 3.
They're very big goals, but you have been doing a lot of stand-up. And especially the pilot, that's very challenging, and you're going to have to make adjustments per your words given what's going on. But I wouldn't say...
Yeah, my pilot's probably making the most traction. I finished my couple of rough drafts, and I'm fine-tuning it again.
Oh, that's
just
exciting.
just in time for me to see a promotion for a television show just like it.
Oh, that's hilarious. So before we go, how can people follow you, keep up to date with you? I know you've got heaps of hilarious clips on all of your socials, so how can people check you out?
The best thing is on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, although I have a hard time keeping up with all 3 of them. I do have a website, but I don't keep up with it. So, And I'm always at Westside Comedy Club, which is the club that I run. So that's the best place to find me.
Amazing.
You want to see me in person.
Yeah, we've got a lot of people in America here, so people can check all of that out in the episode notes. So please do. And you're amazing. You're super empowering. I love you. This was great. And yeah, thank you so much for chatting.
Thank you for having me.
I love Felicia's quote, action is better than inaction. You can sit and wallow, or you can try, and try until you figure it out. This ties in perfectly with the example of her father walking into the art class. Had he resisted going to the class, his life would have been vastly different and he wouldn't have been able to discover his hidden talent. Felicia encourages all of us to find our marvelous, regardless of where you are in age. Her advice is simple and effective. You have to put yourself in a position to succeed, meaning try new things because you never know what else is out there unless you give it a go. So on this note, from Anonymous, nurture your spark, find your uniqueness, and know how much you matter. Thank you for listening to the Funny and Failure podcast, exploring the deeper side of comedy.